Let me tell you about silence. Not the good kind. Not the peaceful, meditative quiet you find on a mountaintop. I'm talking about the heavy, suffocating silence of a large house that's been stripped of its life. The kind of silence that's so complete, the faint hum from the server rack in the basement starts to sound like a jet engine preparing for takeoff. For 15 years, that house wasn't silent. It was filled with the soundtrack of a life I thought we were building together. The sound of my wife Sarah's laugh, a bright, ambitious sound that could fill any room. The rattle of her car keys as she dropped them into the ceramic bowl by the door, a signal that the whirlwind had returned home. The endless, confident murmur of her voice on conference calls as she willed her startup into existence from our home office. That house was my life, and I was its foundation. My name is David. I'm 38 years old, and for the entirety of my adult life, I've been the quiet man in the background. I'm a senior systems administrator. It's not a glamorous job. I'm not the wunderkind coder who ends up on the cover of Forbes. I'm the guy who makes sure that wunderkind's billion-dollar idea doesn't vanish into thin air because of a power surge or a hacker in Eastern Europe. I build, secure, and maintain the invisible architecture that holds the modern world together. I'm methodical, I'm patient, and I find a deep, profound satisfaction in a clean, orderly system. In my world, chaos is the enemy. I was, in every sense of the word, Sarah's support system. When we met, she was a fiery MBA student with dreams that seemed to blot out the sun, and I was just finishing my degree, already working, already stable. She told me she was drawn to my calm. "You're my anchor, Dave," she'd whisper, her head on my shoulder after a frantic day of networking and classes. I loved being her anchor. I thought that was my purpose. My steady salary paid the mortgage on our beautiful home in Palo Alto, a place we could never have afforded if we were both chasing risky dreams. My savings were the seed money for her first two ventures, both of which crashed and burned, but I never held it against her. I saw it as tuition. My paycheck covered the life she needed to live to attract investors. The dinners, the clothes, the conferences. I never once thought of it as my money. It was always ours. Our resources fueling her dream. Her success would be our success. That's what a marriage is, a partnership, a system built for two. To handle the pressure, I started to write. Not in a book, but in a private locked file on my personal laptop. It was my one release valve, my place to be messy when the rest of my life had to be so orderly. I wrote about the frustrations of my own job. I wrote about my anxieties, the gnawing fear that we were living beyond our means. As the years went on, I wrote about the growing distance between us, the feeling that I was becoming more of a utility than a husband. I wrote about my struggles with depression, the waves of inadequacy that would wash over me in a valley filled with titans of industry. It was the raw, unedited code of my soul, and it was for my eyes only. It was the one place in the world I didn't have to be the strong, stable anchor. The end, when it came, wasn't a fiery explosion. It was a clean, quiet execution. I came home on a Tuesday. The house was immaculate. Sarah was sitting at the kitchen island, a glass of wine in her hand, a manila envelope resting on the marble countertop. "David," she said, her voice as cool and smooth as the stone, "I'm divorcing you." The world stopped. The hum from the basement suddenly seemed deafening. I asked the stupid questions. Why? What did I do? What happened? She said, "We're not compatible anymore. I've outgrown this dynamic. I need a partner who is an equal, not just a provider." She slid the envelope toward me. "My attorney will be in touch. You'll be served with official papers tomorrow." Her attorney. His name was Mark, and he was less a lawyer and more a human wrecking ball. He specialized in high-asset Silicon Valley divorces, and his reputation was for complete annihilation. I would soon find out he was also Sarah's new equal partner. The legal process that followed was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Their strategy was insidious. They weren't just going to take my money, they were going to assassinate my character. They would paint me as a bitter, controlling man who resented his wife's success and whose emotional instability was a threat to her well-being. And to do it, they had the ultimate weapon. I can still feel the chill of that deposition room. Mark, a man whose expensive suit couldn't hide his predatory nature, slid a stack of papers across the polished table. His face was a mask of rehearsed pity. "Mr. Parker," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "I know this may be difficult, but could you please read the highlighted passage for the court reporter?" I looked down and all the air left my body. They were my words, my private thoughts, my journal. Sometimes the weight of keeping all this afloat is just crushing. I feel like a ghost in my own house. Am I just the guy who pays the bills? Is this all I am to her now? The loneliness is suffocating. My deepest vulnerabilities, my moments of quiet despair, laid out as Exhibit A. Across the table, Sarah put on a magnificent performance, dabbing a tissue at a perfectly dry eye, her expression one of pained martyrdom. Mark leaned in. "So, Mr. Parker, you felt crushed by the burden of your wife's ambition. You felt suffocated by your life with her. Would you characterize those as the thoughts of a loving, supportive husband, or are they the thoughts of a man consumed by jealousy and control?" They went on like that for hours. Every entry was twisted. My depression was reframed as emotional instability. My financial anxieties became a pattern of financial abuse. My confessions of loneliness were wielded as proof that I was trying to guilt and manipulate her into giving up her dreams. She had gone onto my laptop, my personal computer. She knew the simple password I used for it, a pet's name, something she'd seen me type 1,000 times. She had copied my private world and handed it over to the enemy to be used as ammunition. The betrayal was so absolute it was almost sublime. It was like she had reached into my chest, pulled out my heart, and put it on a scale to be weighed in a court of law. The judge, a woman who clearly saw a reflection of herself in Sarah's narrative of a brilliant woman held back by a resentful man, bought every single word. The final judgment wasn't just a divorce decree, it was a demolition order for my life. Sarah was awarded the house, the judge citing my history of emotional volatility and her need for a stable environment for her business. She was awarded the lion's share of our savings to compensate for the years she'd sacrificed her earning potential to build her startup. And the blow that felt like it shattered my ribs, she was awarded half of my unvested stock options, a decade of my loyalty and hard work for my company sliced in half and handed to her. I walked out of that courtroom with nothing but my old Honda and an order to be out of my home in 30 days. I found a small, soulless apartment in Mountain View that cost a fortune and felt like a prison cell. The silence in that little box was even worse. I was in a daze for weeks. I'd go to work, come home, and just stare at the beige walls, the sheer crushing weight of the humiliation pinning me to the sofa. They hadn't just defeated me, they had rewritten my reality and convinced the world it was true. Then came the night that changed everything. About 3 weeks after I'd moved out, I was sitting in my sterile apartment, remotely accessing the home network to perform a final data wipe of my old user profiles, a standard security protocol when an employee leaves a sensitive network. To do this, I had to use the master credentials for the entire system. The system I had designed, the commercial-grade network, the central home server, that magic box in the basement that stored and synced every piece of data in the house, the automated, encrypted cloud backup that created a perfect mirror of our digital lives. I held the master key. I had built the house, and I had forged the key. As the command to wipe my old profile completed, I paused. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. A thought, cold and clear as a shard of glass, cut through the fog of my depression. She forgot who I am. She and her shark of a lawyer saw David Parker, the sad, broken husband. They had no concept of the man who had built her entire digital infrastructure from the ground up. She thought she stole a file from a laptop. She didn't understand that in my world, nothing is ever truly gone. She didn't understand that I could see the ghosts of every deleted file, every saved draft, every keystroke. She saw a single computer. I saw the entire ecosystem. A fire started to burn in the pit of my stomach. It was a clean, logical fire, not the messy heat of rage. It was the feeling a sysadmin gets when he finds a critical vulnerability in a system. She had introduced a virus of lies into my life. It was time to run a system-wide diagnostic, identify the corruption, and purge it. The game was on. My revenge wouldn't be loud or violent. It would be silent. It would be methodical. And it would be based on nothing but the absolute, verifiable truth. My first move was to quietly access the home server, still humming away in the basement of what used to be my house. For Sarah, it was just part of the plumbing. For me, it was a digital time capsule. The system was designed to create a snapshot of itself every hour, a perfect copy of every file. It was a time machine. I dialed the system back. Not to last week, but to a year ago, before Mark the Shark was in the picture. I found the original business plan for her startup. I read through it, a lump forming in my throat. There, on page 3, under the heading, Founding Partners, was my name. It detailed my initial capital contribution and my role as a technology consultant. Then, I fast-forwarded the system back to the present day and pulled up the version of the business plan she was currently using to court investors. I placed the two documents side by side on my screen and let the software highlight the differences. My name was gone. Every mention of my contribution had been scrubbed clean. The seed money was now listed simply as Founder's Personal Assets. She was methodically and digitally erasing me from the story of her success. It was infuriating, but it wasn't the weapon I needed. It was his word against hers. I needed more. Next, I turned my attention to our cloud backup. This was the master archive. Every important file on every device on our network was automatically and invisibly copied to a secure, encrypted space online. Deleting a file from your computer didn't matter. The cloud had a perfect ghost image. And I, as the administrator of the account, could see everything. I could see the history of every file, and more importantly, I could see every file that had ever been deleted. I went straight to the activity log. It was a digital diary of her deception. And there it was, time-stamped. The exact date and time she had copied my journal, March 14th, 2:17 a.m. My blood went cold. I still had administrative access to our home network router as well. I cross-referenced the server logs with the router's access logs. At 2:10 a.m. on March 14th, a new device had logged on to our guest network. The device's name was registered as Mark's MacBook Pro. He was in my house. He was in my bed. And while he was there, she had crept to my office, sat at my desk, and stolen my most private thoughts to build the case that would destroy me. The rage was so pure, so white-hot, I had to stand up and pace the tiny confines of my apartment just to breathe. Methodical, David. Logical. I pushed the anger down and kept digging in the digital graveyard of her deleted files. I found dozens of them, drafts of her divorce declarations. I could see the tracked changes, the comments back and forth between her and Mark. I could watch them, word by word, crafting the fiction of my abuse, strategizing how to best frame my depression as a weapon against her. It was like watching a replay of my own murder. And then I found the bomb. It was an accounting spreadsheet she had deleted months ago, thinking it was gone forever. I clicked Restore. The file opened. It had 2 tabs at the bottom. The first tab was labeled Investor Deck. It contained the financials she was showing to the venture capitalists. It painted a beautiful picture of a thriving company on the verge of explosive growth. It was a masterpiece of fiction. The second tab was labeled Actuals. My heart began to pound a heavy rhythmic drum against my ribs. This was the truth. This tab told the real story. The company wasn't thriving, it was hemorrhaging money. It was a sinking ship, and she was desperately trying to sell tickets for a luxury cruise. The numbers were inflated, the revenue projections were pure fantasy. What she was doing wasn't just optimistic, it was fraud. But that wasn't the bomb. That was just the fuse. Deep in the actual spreadsheet, under a list of expenses, was a line item that made me stop breathing. It was a wire transfer, a massive one, for $250,000. It was listed as a legal consultation fee paid out to a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands. A ghost company designed to make money disappear. A legal fee of that size paid to an offshore account 5 months before she filed for divorce? It made no sense. Unless it wasn't a legal fee at all. Unless it was her hiding assets before the divorce proceedings began. She was moving our joint money I had earned, into an untraceable account so it wouldn't be on the table when it came time to divide things up. It was brilliant. It was illegal. And it was almost the perfect crime, except for one tiny, arrogant mistake. Her and her lawyer were so confident in their digital illiteracy, they didn't cover their tracks. In another long-deleted folder in the cloud archive, I found a trove of scanned documents, old passports, mortgage papers, and one misplaced file, a PDF of a bank statement for that same Cayman Islands shell company. And on the statement, listed as the sole signatory, the person with control over that $250,000, was one name, Mark, her lawyer. The pieces clicked into place with the cold, satisfying certainty of a server locking into its rack. This wasn't just a divorce, it was a conspiracy. She wasn't just her client, they were partners in crime. He wasn't just representing her, he was helping her hide marital assets, and the payment for his services was a slice of the money they were stealing from me. And they used my own private pain as the smokescreen to cover their tracks. I leaned back in my cheap office chair, the bare bulb of my apartment lamp glinting off my screen. I finally had the truth. All of it. Now it was time to restore the system. My revenge was not going to be a single angry email. It was going to be a work of art, a sysadmin's masterpiece. Quiet, efficient, and devastatingly effective. I created 3 separate, sterile information packages, each one tailored to a specific audience. Package 1 was for the IRS and the Securities and Exchange Commission. It was clean, simple, and anonymous. It contained the 2 versions of the spreadsheet, the lie and the truth. It contained the wire transfer confirmation, and it contained the Cayman Islands bank statement. I didn't add any commentary. I didn't need to. The data spoke for itself. It screamed wire fraud, tax evasion, and securities fraud. I drove to a public library across town, paid in cash for 30 minutes of computer time, and sent the package from a newly created, encrypted email address that would vanish moments after I logged out. Package 2 was for the primary venture capital firm that was on the verge of giving Sarah millions. This one was slightly different. It contained all the financial data from the first package, but I also included a few choice morsels from the deleted drafts of her divorce declarations, the one showing her and Mark gleefully plotting my character assassination. I sent it from a different anonymous account with a simple 2-sentence message. Thought you should see the real books before you invest. Do your due diligence on the character of the founders you back. VCs hate two things: losing money and being made to look like fools. I had just handed them proof that Sarah was capable of both. My third package was my personal favorite. It was for the State Bar of California. This was the kill shot aimed directly at Mark. It contained the evidence of their affair occurring while he was representing her. It contained the proof that they had conspired to use stolen materials, my journal, in a legal proceeding. And it contained the Cayman bank statement with his name on it, proving a massive, undeclared financial conflict of interest with his client. He wasn't her lawyer, he was her co-conspirator. It was a career-ending torpedo of ethical violations. I sent it with a note, "Concerns regarding the conduct of one of your members." I hit send on the last email and shut the library computer down. I walked out into the cool night air and felt, for the first time in months, a sense of peace. I hadn't yelled, I hadn't threatened, I hadn't broken a single law. I had simply taken their corrupted data, organized it, and delivered it to the systems designed to handle it. The fallout was not immediate, but it was total. About a month later, I saw a small article in a tech journal. Sarah's startup had abruptly shuttered after its final round of funding fell through at the last minute. A few weeks after that, a friend who worked in finance told me there were heavy rumors of an SEC investigation into the company's founders for falsifying investor documents. The news about Mark was more public. A legal blog reported that he was under investigation by the state bar for multiple ethical breaches, including a gross conflict of interest and improper client relations. His name was Mud. His reputation as a shark was replaced by a reputation as a crook. The final perfect piece of justice came about 6 months after I sent those emails. I got a certified letter from a court-appointed receiver. Sarah had declared bankruptcy. The house, my house, was being sold to pay off her legal fees and the initial fines from the IRS. She had lost everything. The empire she had tried to build on a foundation of my money and her lies had crumbled to dust. I live in a different apartment now. It's bigger, nicer. I use the money from my stock options, all of them, which were returned to me after the divorce was annulled due to the uncovered fraud, to buy myself some stability. The house is quiet here too, but it's a different kind of silence. It's the clean, peaceful silence of a system in balance. The hum from my new upgraded server in the corner of my office isn't a roar anymore. It's a gentle, reassuring whisper. It's the sound of order restored, the sound of a story that has finally been told correctly, and it's the best sound in the world.